everyone, and welcome to Inspiring Boys, Empowering Fathers, and Transforming Lives. This is our fourth podcast, helping our boys be achievers in school. And as we start the new year back to school, this is just the perfect time to talk about this. So as you know, my name is Lynda, and I'm here with Jim Brown. Jim Brown, do you want to say a few words of welcome?
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be involved in this. I think that this is really worth doing. I think you're doing a great job, Lynda. Keep it up. Good for you.
Well, thank you, Jim. We're following Jim's book called Rescuing Our Underachieving Sons, and you're welcome to a copy. Just drop us an email at inspiringboys@menandfamilies.org, and Jim would be happy to send you out a free copy. In the meantime, here's our podcast, and hope you find this helpful this week. Okay, so as we mentioned, today we're going to talk about helping boys achieve in the education system, because last week we met with a dad. We talked about what to do before they start school, and now we want to talk about, okay, now your son's off to school, and what's going on in the education system, and that's what we're here to talk about, to help you understand that and give you tips on what you can do. So
You'll notice that the first sentence on this says that school is not designed for boys. That statement comes from the young boys that have been interviewed, that we've interviewed, that tell us that the way school operates, and these are just little boys. It's a place for women teachers to teach little girls, and the boys, a lot of boys, feel they don't belong, and many of them tell their parents this as well. Of course, then they're told, well, get on with it, and so on. But the fact of the matter is that there is that perception, and so we've listed a few items here under this heading of school is not designed for boys that give an indication of how the school system really doesn't tend to be designed for boys. Lynda?
yeah, let's talk about those. So one of them is limited physical activity, and boys are very, as any of you that are parents know, that boys are very physically active. They have a lot of energy. When my son was young, he had a lot of energy just trying to keep up with them. And so school is you're sitting still all day long, and it's not great for boys. So there's not enough. They need to have time here and there to kind of blow off some steam or some energy, and that's why recess is so important. I know there's a few schools in the U.S. where they've cut out recess, and that's been detrimental to boys. And I'm not sure what's happening in various schools around Canada, but there's always talk of limiting or removing recess. The other thing we've talked about is girl-focused stories. Quite often the stories they read in school are about girls. Girls are the main character, which is fine as long as you balance it with stories where boys are the main character. And Jim, I think you wrote some books with boys as the central role model.
Yes, it became quite obvious to me that there weren't a lot of boy-centric books around, and I checked this with the publishers and so on, and they made it very clear to me that they publish about 10 times as many girl-focused stories for young children as they do boys. And when I pressed them on that, they said in many cases it's because they can't sell books that are boy-focused. Parents tend to buy 10 times as many books for girls as they do boys. But consequently, when children arrive in school, the material they read tends to be very girl-focused. So I think we need to be very conscious of that. I will go on to the next one here and indicate that schools now have largely female teachers, both at the elementary and secondary level. And 50 years ago, about 1/3 of the elementary school teachers were male, and now there are virtually none. And you can easily talk to a school where there are no male teachers in the school at all. And I'm not talking about this from we have to be fair in terms of hiring. I'm not talking about that at all. It's just that, female teachers have never been little boys and male teachers have never been little girls. And consequently, they don't have a deep inside understanding of that. And of course, when it's virtually all female teachers, from a boy's point of view, we're back to that statement about school is designed for women teachers and girls. Takes us to literacy. Okay, Lynda, do what you can with this one.
Okay, well, as you know, children learn at different levels and at different ages. They develop reading skills and literacy skills, and they come from a bunch of different backgrounds. So when they come to school, different children are at different stages of literacy. So and what the school does, it assumes that everybody's arriving at one particular level of literacy, and that's not the case, especially in the primary grades where age makes a real difference. So because we have at least in Canada, in Ontario, people have to, you can come to school up until the December 31st when you turn 4. We've got kids that are turning 4 on December 29th or 31st even, and we've got kids that are turning 4 on January 1st. So some of these kids come to school and there's a 1-year age difference. And that makes a big difference. Their brains aren't even at the same developmental level. So they're at different stages, and the school doesn't recognize this. It's got its program, and the teachers have their program, and that's what the teachers do because that's what they've been told to do. But there's no focus on the individual levels that are coming into the classroom.
So we have children, we have easily 2 children can be in the same classroom that are a year apart in age, a year less a day apart in age. And, at my age, probably doesn't make that much difference, but it sure makes a difference when you're talking about a quarter or a fifth of a child's life and development. So in fact, our classrooms, all of our classrooms, in spite of the grade labels on the door, all of those classrooms are in effect one-room schoolhouses because you have children at just on age alone, phenomenally different in terms of age. And then of course, the maturation and so on of the particular child can be different regardless of the particular age that we're talking about. So these are critical. And of course, the programs that teachers are given to work with, that's not personalized to reflect the different stages of development. And I go back to what I'm saying, and it's very critical that we recognize that if there are 25 children in that classroom, they're at 25 different points, very similar to what you would have experienced in the old days in this area in terms of one-room schoolhouses. And of course, one-room schoolhouses still exist in different spots around Ontario and across Canada. So we need teacher training that helps people to be able to deal with that. That's teacher training that was taken for granted 60 years ago, but isn't now. So there are difficulties with that. So something to keep in mind as we move on, Lynda.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about, today what's happening. If we don't address these items, there are a lot of long-term consequences, current terms, but as well as longer-term consequences of academic underachievement, which we're going to talk about. So, we've talked about this before. Boys who underachieve in school, this is what happens to them quite often. They're weak readers in the later grades. As they move forward, their reading skills aren't that great. They're 6 times more likely to be identified as having learning disabilities. So, as an adult, and you're looking at this child and he's not able to read or he's stumbling a bit, you may think he's having learning disabilities, and it's not necessarily the case. He just needs help with his reading. And then, of course, unfortunately, that leads to that he's 60% more likely to be diagnosed as having attention deficit disorder, which is a big problem. It's an escalating issue. So then that leads to possibly the education system decides the child should be medicated. And this goes to our slide that we talked about before, our underachievement cycle. So as we mentioned, you start with lack of success in school, and then the child starts to feel inadequate, like we all do when you start a job. Um, you're uneasy, you don't know the people, you don't know what you're supposed to do, and you start feeling inadequate because people around you are achieving and you're not. And then that's just very stressful for the child. Completely, it's a very debilitating stress, and the child can't articulate that they're under stress, but this is what's happening to them. And then if that's still not resolved, and that's leading to depression, and then they have difficulty sleeping, and then they start doing poor at school, and that's what we call this underachievement cycle. So it keeps happening over and over and over again.
It gives us an indication that we need to be doing things to be dealing with underachieving children who in our current system tend to be mostly boys. We need to be dealing with that, because if we don't, we're just simply building in this cycle, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We said, oh, I think this boy is I think boys in general underachieve. And then we create a system where they're guaranteed to underachieve. And we say, see, we were right all along. They're underachievers. No, they're not. We need to deal with it. And it can be dealt with, and it can be prevented. So that's part of what we're going to talk about here. That's part of what we're talking about in general.
And it's not just, again, short term. Here's the long-term consequences. Jim, do you want to talk about some of the long-term consequences?
Yeah. Once boys have accepted the fact that they are that school isn't for them, that school isn't for boys, and it isn't for men either, because the reality is that the teachers and the people that run the place aren't the same as they are. Okay, so they're less likely to graduate from secondary school if they've been identified, or they are in fact underachieving. They're less likely then to go on to post-secondary school or to a trade school, or to develop those skills. And this is really significant, because the percentage of boys graduating from secondary school who now are determined they're not going on any further in education because of how they feel about it is increasing. The number of boys going on to post-secondary school is declining. So that's like the first time in history. It's always been increasing. Now it's not. The number of girls going on is increasing. The number of boys is decreasing. And that's not genetic, and it's not gender. It's caused by the way the school system operates. And of course, one of the things that we talk about is what can we do as dads, or what can we do as parents to help to offset that, because we're not likely to suddenly change our schools to reflect this picture. So we need to be looking at what we can do. And this, of course, has long-term economic consequences for boys, and it has for the whole family. Obviously, people that go to post-secondary school, the probability of them being employed at anything is much higher, and the general salaries that they're receiving is much higher. When we talk about girls and them being disadvantaged in terms of their incomes, in fact, if you look at the under 30s, women in general tend to have higher salaries than boys do, and that's related to this whole issue of post-secondary school. When we get to colleges or universities, the majority of the undergraduates are female. And it has long-term social consequences for this young man too, in the sense that young man that's perhaps a secondary school dropout, or perhaps he's graduated secondary school but hasn't gone any further. He may form a family with a nice young woman who, in fact, is better educated than he is, and he may be going in and out of employment as the economy shifts, where she works steadily. And this has social consequences for that man and for that woman and for the family. So we need to be very concerned about the long-term consequences that come from allowing or creating boys that'll be underachievers. Anyway, for a variety of systemic and societal rather than biological factors, boys are much more likely to be underachievers than girls are. So we need to be addressing this issue, and our whole society needs to address it, and our schools need to address it.
So this is how we start down the path of what can we do. So if we take a look at a child or a son, a boy that's come from an achiever, a son that's achieved, he's coming from a particular home environment. What do we need to do in that home? So, usually that child has been in a more stimulating environment where dads speak to the son and read to them more often, and that type of thing, stimulating his interest in reading and literacy and books. They get a lot of encouragement, especially from, if they're sons, especially from their dads. Their dads giving them, "Hey, great job. I'm really glad, or you're doing well. Keep going." And that in turn, as we've talked about many things, one thing leads to another, helps the son develop a higher self-esteem and more confidence, because they're getting constant encouragement, especially from their dad. Boys look to their dads, girls sometimes look to their moms. It's not always the case, but that happens most of the time. And if they have this confidence in themselves, then they work harder, not just because they want to please the parents, but because they want to achieve, because they're engaged, which is a key word. We've probably heard Jim say many times. The kids need to be engaged in what they're doing, engaged in the books, engaged in learning. So they need to see that from the parents, from the dad. And just a note here that, when we talk about dads, it's not just necessarily the biological dad. It could be an adopted dad, a foster dad. You could be an uncle. You could be a family friend. Whatever the male role model is in your son's life, or maybe you're in an opportunity where there's more than one, which would be great. But these are the kind of things that they need to see in the environment that they're in. So next, what can dads do to help their sons? And we're talking about in school. So by dads doing these things we're going to talk about in a few minutes, their school achievement research has shown that it can be increased by as much as 35%. And that's a huge number.
And that comes out of research that's been done in Canada. The research done in Canada has shown that doing these items that are listed on this slide can raise a child's school achievement by as much as 35%. Now, these don't cost a lot of money. They're not terribly difficult to do, but they have to be done relatively consistently. It's not a one-time fix-all situation. This is not a magic pill, but it is, as we change our approach to parenting, we can help our boys in school to do much better, to achieve better. So one of these is having daily conversations with your son about what he learned that day. And it's important that we do that. So also important we recognize that probably the first time we ask our son that question, he's going to say nothing, or basically not want to play, so to speak. but you have to stick with it consistently. And before too long, the boy will begin to reflect on what, in fact, happened during the course of that day and something that he sees of value. Now, I'm happy to say that not only have I worked with parents who have done that and talked about the success of it, I actually used this particular technique with children that were, or boys that were school phobic. They didn't want to be in school, didn't like it at all. And when they stopped and thought about what they had learned that day and started talking about it, it made a significant difference, a long-term difference. So I would strongly recommend this one. And we have to set high expectations for our children. They have to be attainable, of course, but we have to deal with the fact that setting high expectations is very helpful. And it's something that we need to recognize. We need to model the desired behavior. If a child sees his dad reading and doing things of that nature, the boy's more likely to want to do that, to be like dad. So these things are very significant. Now, the critical one here for me is that it's useful to have a conference with the teacher early and on a regular basis. See, as this child's dad, I'm the expert on this child. Teacher's not going to tell me that the child knows more about my child than I do. I'm the expert on this child. The teacher's the expert on the program, but I'm the expert on my son. So we need to share that information back and forth. And I say conference with the teacher, it can be as simple as a telephone call to the teacher early in the school year, maybe right at the beginning of the school year, just to fill the teacher in on what they need to know. Maybe it's a drop-in talk for a few minutes. We're not talking about 2-hour efforts or even half-hour efforts. We're talking about sharing this information back and forth and showing that you are, as a parent, you are interested in how your son is doing. This is not a question of complaining. It's not a question of being critical. It's not a question of going down the list of all the things the teacher supposedly is doing wrong. It's just a case of letting the teacher know what the teacher can benefit by knowing about my son, what's unique about my son. Anyway, the teacher's the expert in the program. Well, what else can dads do? What else
Well,
can they do?
you can get a copy of the curriculum, at least in Ontario, at the Ministry of Ontario Education website. And so you can see, here's what your son's expected to be able to do to succeed in that particular grade. What are they going to work on? Maybe ask, talk to the teacher about those various units, whatever the unit is, whether it's whatever they're talking about, whether it's weather or math or whatever they're doing. Ask a teacher about those topics as throughout the time frame and say, hey, what can I do to help him succeed? Even if he's doing well, you can still find out what else can he do. And the most important thing, as we've talked many times, make sure you understand his reading level. Make sure he's at the right level and make sure he enjoys reading. Anything to add there?
Well, yeah, I was going to, the next note on there says, we need to remember that poor reading ability is often misdiagnosed as a learning disability. A child arrives in grade 3 and doesn't read very well. And we now begin to say, well, we need to give the child some testing. We need to give this boy some testing. And if the testing comes out saying the child has a learning disability, well, the fact of the matter is an awful lot of the generic learning disabilities that are identified aren't such. And there are school boards in the province, school systems in the province that in fact have addressed this issue and quite successfully and have reduced the number of children with poor reading ability and consequently don't have nearly as many learning disabilities. And I think, Lynda, it's important that you go to that last item that's on there, by dad we mean.
Yes, it's really important. So, not everyone has a biological dad living with them or in their family for various reasons. So it could be, a grandpa, an uncle, family friend, um, whatever type of role model. You need to have someone in your son's life. Um, and, whoever that is, whether it's an adopted dad, whether it's, a dad from you're in a split marriage, stepdad, all those types of things, that dad still needs to set that example. So they can help just as much as a biological dad. So when we say dad, this is a concept, what we mean, a male role model in the son's life, not just the biological dad. So in addition, we have dads that don't live with their sons full time. But these practices can still apply. I know it's hard when you don't live with them, but pick up the phone, send an email, and you can do these same activities. I know it's harder, but you can still do these things over the phone. So when you call your son, this goes back to the question Jim talked about. What did you learn in school today? And each time when you call him and say, "Hey, what did you learn in school today?" Then that starts a conversation with your son, find out what's happening, in his life. And eventually, as we've said before, then the son knows, oh no, dad's going to ask me this question. I better make sure I have the answer. Um, Another thing you can do, you can read a story over the phone. Get a storybook, read part of the story and leave it hanging. Don't tell him the ending. And we're all like that, right? Oh, I got to listen to the next episode. What's going to happen to the character, right? So you can do that as a way for your son to say, "Oh, I can't wait for dad to call because I got to find out what happened to, whoever the main character is, Billy the turtle or whatever he is." um, and it encourages a connection with you and your son, but also has them thinking, "Oh, I wonder what's going to happen." Ask them to, "What do you think will happen next time?" "Well, wait and see when I call you." Um, you know, and that helps with their literacy skills. It helps with their imagination. They don't know what's going to happen next, and that can be done over the phone. Um, you can give them positive feedback. "Hey, how's it going?" And you say, "Oh, I'm glad things are going well," or you provide those expectations over the phone. It's about communication. I know it's different over the phone, but that can be done over the phone. You can do by email. You can do a voice recording and email it to him or send it to him, however your communication process is with your son, and set those expectations and tell him, you know, when he achieves those and why it's important that he achieves those.
And I think it's really important that we make sure that it's one thing for us to have expectations for our sons, but we need to make sure that our son is aware of what those expectations are. And it's useful to ask the child to tell us how he thinks he's doing.
And something else you can do either with your son or, when you see him or over the phone is, build a book with dad. So, I don't know if you've seen those. I don't know if they still have them. Those build a bear. Well, more importantly, build a book.
Yeah.
And start with your son. Give him start with a story, and give him some characters. And make up the first part of the story, and you say, "Okay, you think about the story, and next time when I call you, you give me the next episode." And so that gives him something to think about. And then you talk to him and say, "Okay, this is how Billy started out in the story. What do you think's going to happen next? Tell me what your part of the story is." And then you add to it. And then the next time he adds to it. So it's a back and forth, and treat it like a game, so back and forth and back and forth. Here's chapter 1. Okay, you write chapter 2. Well, I'll write chapter 3. And it becomes kind of a fun thing that he can look forward to, that you build it together. And then he can um, draw pictures and write down the story, depending on his literacy skills. But he can draw pictures and he can make the book. And then when you do see him, he can say, "Here, look, Dad, I built the book that we talked about." And then he can something he can be proud of, and helps him with writing and literacy because he has to draw the pictures, he has to write the story, and he has to think about it. Everything to add there, Jim?
Well, just that it's very, very important that uh, for a boy to be engaged with his dad. Um, his dad cares what's happening to him and that they work together on these things, because it tells the boy that this is what dads do. This is what grown men do. And I want to be like my dad when I grow up. Very, very important.
Yeah,
Anyway,
setting that role model is important. So,
yeah, I think
okay.
so. Very, 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 very important.
So just in summary, we have a, a pyramid here that all the things we've talked about so far on our various podcasts, and how to raise an achiever, an achieving son, a successful son that's going to be successful both not just in education, post-secondary, trade school, economically, socially. It's all important, starting at the very bottom. So with dad reading 15 minutes a day to your preschool son and every day thereafter, every day. Um, and then that way, when the son starts school, he's got basic literacy skills. He'll be able to keep up with what's going on in the classroom. He won't fall behind in his reading skills, and it's something you want to continually work on. And then by grade 3, it's important that your son is able to read at the appropriate level. Jim, did you have anything to add to that about grade 3 is an important marker?
Well, uh, the research tells us that if you have the appropriate literary skills at age 15, that's a good predictor of how you're going to do in terms of post-secondary education and a whole lot of activities related to that. But the big predictor of how of your literacy skills at age 15 is how well you're doing by grade 3. So, and the big predictor for grade 3 goes back to what dads were doing preschool. So it's really important for us to see that there's a connection in these things, and we don't solve it with a magic bullet somewhere along the line. We work at it consistently from the beginning, and we stay with it consistently. Good stuff. I like it, Lynda. You're doing a great job here.
Great. So keep this in mind. This is a good summary of everything we've talked about, and it's a continual, ongoing thing. So what's up next? Our next podcast, we're going to talk to a dad that has early school age children. And what is he doing? How's it working for him? Has he tried some of the things that we've talked about? And then you can hear what he has to say. Send us your comments and questions. We'd love to hear from you. Um, you know, send us your, sorry, my power is flickering here with the thunderstorm. Apologize. Send us an email at inspireboys@menandfamilies.org. We want to hear from you. Tell us what you've tried. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Or give us suggestions that we can share with other dads. That's what we're looking for. Dads communicating with dads. We have a survey if you want to fill in. We'd again love to hear from you. We'll send you a copy. Just send us an email. And as we talked about at the beginning, if you want some more data and research to support what we've talked about on our podcast, Jim's happy to send you a book, his book that he wrote. And he's also has some children's books that he's written that are also available. Any last words, Jim, before we wrap up?
Well, I want to say that it's been delightful to be involved in this, and I'm really looking forward to the next session we have where we get a dad who has young school age boys on. That'll be useful for all of us. Thank you
Yes, we're
very
really
much.
looking forward to that. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for folks that are listening, and have a great day.